The letter came tied to the broken gate with a strip of blue feed sack. And Daniel Keene remembered that detail because almost nothing else on the place was tied down anymore. The east rail had dropped in the night. The lower pasture ditch had filled with sand again, and the milk cow stood by the trough with one hind leg lifted, looking at him as if even she was tired of making trouble. Daniel had been on that claim for 6 years, long enough to build a house, long enough to bury 2 good dreams in bad weather, long enough to learn that a farm does not fail in one dramatic afternoon. It fails by inches. A gate leans. A hinge waits. A ledger goes unopened because the pump needs mending. A roof drips because the mule has gone lame. A man tells himself he will get to it tomorrow, and tomorrow arrives carrying 3 more things in both hands. That was the morning he found the letter. Not in the mailbox, not delivered by the stage, not handed over with any introduction. Just a thin brown envelope tied to the gatepost, held there by a strip of feed sack and the stubbornness of whoever had left it. Daniel stood in the yellow grass and turned it over twice before he opened it. The handwriting inside was small, straight, and severe. If the position is still open, I can manage a kitchen, keep accounts, handle chickens, mend harness, plant a garden, and do field work when needed. I am not afraid of hard conditions. I am afraid only of dishonest ones. I require wages on the 1st of the month, fair speech, and a room with a bolt on the door. My name is Esther Vale. That was all. No pleading, no charm. No explanation of where she had heard about the place, only the facts. Daniel read it once in the wind, then again with his thumb holding the paper flat. A room with a bolt on the door. He noticed that line more than the rest. He folded the letter and put it in his shirt pocket, where it stayed through the rest of that day while he reset the gate, dragged sand out of the ditch, wrapped the cow's leg, and ate cold beans standing at the stove, because sitting down would have felt too much like admitting defeat. He did not answer that night. He did not answer the next morning either. But on the 3rd evening, after the house had gone quiet, and the lamp flame had lowered to a blue bead, he took out a sheet of paper and wrote back. He did not make the place sound better than it was. He told her the truth. The claim sat 3 miles beyond the North Fork Road. The house had 2 rooms and a lean-to kitchen. The roof was sound over the bed, less certain over the pantry. There were 49 head of cattle, 1 milk cow, 12 chickens if the fox had not taken another by then, and a garden plot that had mostly surrendered to weeds. The wages would be paid on time if the calves brought fair money in October. If they did not, he would still pay, but not easily. He wrote that the work would be hard. He wrote that he was not seeking a wife by trickery or a servant by another name. He wrote that the small back room had a door and he could fit a bolt before she arrived. Then he sat with the pencil still in his hand, looking at the last line. He added, "If those terms are too poor, you would be right not to come." Then he signed his name before he could soften it. Her reply came 8 days later. It was shorter than his. "I have read your letter. Poor terms are not the same as false ones. I will arrive on the Wednesday freight wagon. Please have the accounts available." Daniel read that line twice. Please have the accounts available. Not a trunk list, not a question about Sunday services, not a concern about loneliness, danger, or the size of the room. The accounts. For the first time in months, Daniel looked around his kitchen as though someone else had already walked into it and judged him correctly. He cleaned until midnight. He scrubbed the table. He swept under the stove. He fixed the bolt on the back room door and tested it 3 times. Then he took the ledger out from the flour bin where he had put it to keep from seeing it. It looked worse in lamplight. Most true things do. Esther Vale arrived on a wagon that carried seed sacks, 2 barrels of lamp oil, and one silent woman in a gray traveling dress. She had 1 trunk, 1 canvas bundle, and a cracked white cup wrapped in cloth, which she carried herself even after the driver offered to take it. She was somewhere in her early 30s, with brown hair pinned low and tight, not for beauty, but for work. Her face was not hard exactly. It was measured. The kind of face a person gets when she has learned not to waste a reaction in front of strangers. She stepped down, looked first at the leaning windbreak, then the house, then the ditch line, then Daniel. Not shyly, not boldly, accurately. "You are Mr. Keene," she said. "I am. I am Esther Vale." "I figured as much." She glanced toward the lower pasture. "Your ditch is cut too shallow on the west bend. It will keep filling every time the wind runs hard." Daniel said nothing for half a second. A half second was long enough for him to understand that she had been on his land less than 1 minute and had already found the thing he hated most about it. "I know," he said. "Knowing is not the same as changing it." "No," he said, "it is not." She looked back at him, and for the first time almost smiled. Almost. Then the expression was gone. "May I see the room?" He showed her. The room was small. There was a narrow bed, a washstand, a peg on the wall, and 1 square window looking toward the cottonwoods. The bolt was new. It shone brighter than everything else in the room. Esther noticed it. She put 1 hand on it, slid it once, and nodded. "Thank you," she said. Only that. But the way she said it told Daniel the bolt mattered more than the bed, more than the window, more than anything else he could have prepared. After she put her trunk inside, she came back to the kitchen and sat at the table. "The accounts," she said. He gave her the ledger. She read in silence for nearly 20 minutes. Daniel stood by the stove, wanting to explain the worst of it, and knowing every explanation would sound like an excuse. Esther asked about the calf losses, then the feed purchases, then the repair debt at Harker's store, then why the north pasture had been grazed twice in 1 season. Each question was clean, no pity in it, no scolding, just a hand touching the weak boards of a house to see which ones might still hold. At last, she closed the ledger and set both palms on the cover. "You are not finished," she said. Daniel looked at her. "I did not ask if I was." "No," she said. "But men in trouble often answer questions nobody asked." He almost laughed. It surprised him enough that he did not manage it properly. Esther stood. "Show me the pantry." That was how she began. Not with comfort, not with gratitude, not with any bright talk about new beginnings. She began by counting jars. By the end of the first week, Daniel understood 2 things. First, Esther Vale had not exaggerated a single word in her letter. Second, she had left a great deal out. She rose before he did, not because she made a show of industry, but because she seemed to consider daylight a tool and disliked wasting it. She could set a hen without frightening it. She could sharpen a kitchen knife properly. She could read a store account and spot a dishonest rounding before the ink dried. She knew how long beans could go without water, when a calf's cough was weather and when it was sickness, and how to make 3 poor meals feel less poor by serving them as if poverty had not entered the room. But it was the ditch that changed the place first. On her 4th morning, she walked the West Bend with Daniel, asked for a spade, and cut a new channel, so plain and sensible he was embarrassed he had not done it months earlier. By evening, the water moved. Not much, but enough. Daniel stood over it, listening to that small sound. Esther wiped mud from her wrist with the edge of her apron. "A place does not need miracles," she said. "It needs the right things done before they become dramatic." He looked at her then, not because the sentence was pretty, it was not, because it was true, and because she said it like someone who had learned it the expensive way. The cracked white cup appeared on the kitchen windowsill 3 days later. Daniel noticed it while pouring coffee. Inside it was a stub of brown root and 2 green leaves no larger than fingernails. "What is that?" he asked. "Currant," Esther said. "You carried a currant root in a cup all the way here?" "Yes." "Why?" She did not look up from kneading dough. "Because I had one." That was all she offered. Daniel looked at the cup again. It was chipped on one side and hairline cracked near the bottom, but the soil inside was dark and neatly pressed. The little root leaned toward the window, stubbornly alive. He did not ask another question, but after that, when he came in from morning chores, he looked at the cup before he looked at the stove. By the 3rd week, the house had changed in ways he could not fully name. The same walls were there, the same patched roof, the same stove that smoked when the wind came wrong, but nothing felt abandoned inside it. The hooks by the door held coats instead of rope and bent nails. The pantry shelves were marked by chalk lines. The accounts were stacked by month, each tied with string. A jar of buttons stood where the whiskey bottle used to stand, though Daniel could not remember throwing the bottle out. Esther did not lecture him about any of it. That made it worse somehow, and better. She simply made order, and order made its own accusation. The land noticed her too, or that was how Daniel thought of it, though he would never have said so aloud. The chickens began laying better when she moved them out of the draft. The garden, which he had considered a lost cause, came up in neat green rows by late May. The cattle settled easier when the pasture rotation made sense. Even the mule, who disliked everyone on principle, allowed Esther to check his shoulder without pinning his ears. Daniel began to rely on her before he admitted he was doing it. That was the dangerous part. The dangerous things on a farm are rarely the ones that announce themselves. A broken axle is clear. A sick calf is clear. A storm cloud has the manners to show its face. Need is quieter. It comes in by repetition. A cup already placed near his elbow. A figure corrected before it becomes a debt. A gate latched behind him without being asked. Another human breath in the house after dark. For years, Daniel had believed loneliness was a thing a man endured because naming it would not move a fence post. By June, he understood that loneliness had been doing work on him. Bad work. Slow work. The kind that hollows a man out until he mistakes the hollow for discipline. Esther did not fill that hollow with noise. She did not fill it with tenderness, not in any obvious way. She filled it with usefulness. And usefulness, when offered steadily enough, begins to resemble care. The first letter for Esther arrived near the end of June. Daniel found it in the dry goods bundle after a trip to town. The envelope was cream-colored, expensive paper, with her name written in a bold hand that pressed hard enough to bruise the page. He laid it on the kitchen table when he came in. Esther saw it. For 1 second, all the work went out of her face. Then it returned. "Thank you," she said. She took the letter to her room and closed the door. Daniel went outside. There was no reason to go outside. The evening chores were done, the stock was quiet, the sky was clear. Still, he went out and stood by the cottonwoods until the light thinned, because the house suddenly felt like a place where a private pain had taken up space, and he had no right to crowd it. She was different after that. Not worse at her work, never that. The meals came, the accounts stayed clean, the ditch held, the garden grew. But a small stillness entered her. It was not the stillness he had first mistaken for reserve. It was tighter than that, a held breath. Daniel did not ask. He told himself that was respect. Mostly it was. But there was cowardice in it too, and he knew it. It is easier to let a locked door stay locked when you are afraid of what standing beside it might require. The second letter arrived 3 weeks later. This time she opened it at the table. Daniel was mending a bridle strap. Esther read the page without sitting down. Then she folded it once, precisely, and held it in both hands. "There is a man from the town where I lived," she said. Daniel set the bridle down. "He believes patience is the same as permission." That was the sentence. Not a story, not an explanation. But it opened enough of a door that Daniel understood the room behind it was dark. "What does he want?" Daniel asked. "What he has wanted for years." "And what have you told him?" "No." "How many times?" "Enough that a decent man would have stopped counting." Daniel looked toward the window. The currant root had put out a third leaf. "Is he decent?" Esther's mouth tightened. "He is respected." "That was not my question." "No," she said. "He is not decent." Daniel nodded once. "All right." She studied him. "All right?" "You have told him no," Daniel said. "You are in my house under fair terms. You have done nothing wrong. So if he comes here, he will find those facts already waiting." Esther looked down at the letter. For a moment he thought she might cry. She did not. Instead, she folded the page smaller and smaller, until it was a hard little square. "I do not need you to fight my battles. I did not offer to fight. What did you offer?" Daniel picked up the bridle strap again, though he did not work it. "To stand where the truth stands," he said. She looked at him for a long time. Then she went to the stove and stirred the beans before they burned. Nothing more was said that night. But the next morning, Daniel found her in the yard at sunrise, resetting the line for the bean poles with a string pulled tight between 2 sticks. Her hands were steady. The line was straight. That was Esther's way. Whatever storm came, she answered first by making something straight. His name Daniel learned from the storekeeper, was Russell Brant, a widower with property, money, church standing, and the smooth confidence of a man accustomed to being treated as a solution. Brant owned the flour mill in Stanton. He lent seed grain to men who needed it and remembered the debt longer than they did. He had known Esther's uncle. He had expected Esther to marry into his house after his wife died, and expectation had hardened in him until he mistook it for law. "He's been asking," the storekeeper said while tying Daniel's flour sack, "about your place, about whether she's safe, about whether the arrangement is proper." Daniel paid for the flour and lifted the sack to his shoulder. "Was he asking out of concern?" the storekeeper added. Daniel looked at him. The man stopped smiling. On the ride home, Daniel thought of telling Esther, then thought better of telling her in the wrong way. When he reached the house, he set the flour in the pantry and went to the back room door. The bolt was firm. He checked the window latch, too. It was old and loose. By dusk, he had replaced it. Esther noticed at supper. Her eyes moved once toward the hallway, then back to him. Daniel said nothing. She said nothing. The silence between them was not empty. It was carrying a message neither of them was ready to put down in words. July burned hot and hard. The grass crisped early. The cattle had to be moved before the lower pasture was ready. The pump began to clank at the worst possible time, and Harker's store sent word that old repair debt would need to be settled by August, not October. This was the darkest part of that year, though Daniel did not understand it then. Not because everything broke at once, because everything almost worked. That is the crueler pressure. A place far gone can be abandoned with a clean grief. A place almost saved makes a person bargain with pieces of himself. Daniel considered selling 12 head early. The price was poor, but it would clear Harker's debt and buy winter certainty. It would also cut the calves they needed next spring and leave the land poorer for 1 year's fear. He laid the figures on the kitchen table. Esther read them. Outside, heat lightning pulsed behind the cottonwoods with no rain beneath it. "Selling 12 head solves August," she said. "I know. It damages next April. I know that too. Then why is it on the table?" Daniel rubbed both hands over his face. "Because August is closer." Esther did not answer quickly. When she did, her voice was lower. "That is how men like Brant win." Daniel looked up. "They make the near thing so heavy, you hand over the future to breathe for 1 more month." The room went quiet. She had not only been talking about cattle. They both knew it. Daniel leaned back in his chair. "What would you do?" Esther turned the ledger around. "Sell the 2 barren cows, not 12 good ones. Trade the wagon harness repair for garden produce over 6 weeks. Ask Celia Marsh to take the north pasture calves for a month against half a winter hay share. Pay Harker 1/3 now, the rest after market. He will complain because complaining is free, but he will take money before he takes pride." Daniel stared at the page. It was not wishful. It was not easy. It was a hard plan, which was different from a desperate one. "How long have you been thinking on this?" he asked. "Since the first letter came." "From Brant?" "From reality," she said. Then, softer, Brant only reminded me that delay has teeth. They followed her plan. Harker complained exactly as predicted. Celia Marsh took the calves and said Esther had more sense than most men born with land in their hands. The garden produce sold better than Daniel expected, especially the beans and early onions. The barren cows brought less than he wanted, and more than he feared. By the end of August, the claim had not been saved, but it had been steadied. There is a difference. Saved is a word for endings. Steadied is a word for work that intends to continue. And Esther, more than anyone Daniel had ever known, understood continuation. Russell Brant arrived on the first cold morning of September. Daniel saw the buggy from the ridge road before Esther did. A black buggy. Fresh paint, matched harness. A man driving like the road owed him a level surface. Daniel came into the kitchen. Esther was lifting bread from the oven. "There's a buggy coming," he said. "Fine harness, Stanton direction." She set the bread down carefully, not quickly, carefully. "That will be him. How do you want it handled?" She untied her apron, folded it over the chair, and stood for one breath with her hand on the back of it. "Plainly," she said. Brant stopped in front of the house and stepped down as if the yard were a room he had entered by invitation. He was broad, clean-shaven, well-dressed, with gloves pale enough to prove he did not mend what he owned. He took in the house, the garden rows, the repaired ditch, the cattle beyond the fence, and then Esther in the doorway. His expression changed, only slightly, but enough. He had expected a woman hiding. He had found a woman working. "Esther," he said. "Mr. Brant?" That formal address bothered him. Daniel could see it land. "I have come to take you home." "This is my home." No anger, no raised voice, no trembling. She said it the way she would say the ditch runs west now. Brant glanced at Daniel. "I would like a private conversation." Esther answered before Daniel could. "No." Brant's mouth tightened. "You are making yourself the subject of talk." "I did not choose the talk." "You chose this arrangement." "Yes." "A hired woman in a bachelor's house." "A working woman on a working claim." He took one step forward. Daniel did not move toward him. He only shifted enough to stand fully beside the doorway. Brant noticed. "I can offer you security," Brant said. Esther looked past him toward the fields. For a moment, Daniel saw the whole shape of the choice as she must have seen it for years. A respectable house that was not hers. A name that would protect her by owning her. A future without hunger, bought by closing every door from the inside. Then she looked back. "You can offer a room," she said. "You cannot offer me a life." Brant's face darkened. "You think this is a life?" Esther stepped out onto the porch. The wind moved the loose hairs at her temple. Her work dress was flour-dusted. Her hands were marked by garden soil and oven heat. Behind her, in the kitchen window, the cracked cup held the currant root in full green. "Yes," she said, "I do." That was the end of it, though Brant required several more sentences to discover the fact. He spoke of duty. She spoke of no promise made. He spoke of reputation. She spoke of truth. He spoke of what people would believe. She said people could believe what they could afford, but she would not pay for it with herself. At last, Brant looked at Daniel. "You are satisfied with this?" Daniel met his eyes. "I have never found the truth unsatisfactory." Brant stood very still. Then he put on his gloves with the careful violence of a man trying not to show he has lost. He climbed into the buggy and turned it hard enough to scar the yard. Neither Daniel nor Esther spoke until the road swallowed him. Then Esther exhaled, not loudly, but as if her body had been holding the breath for years. Daniel looked at her. "Are you all right?" "No," she said. Then, after a moment, "But I am free." The sentence stood between them, bigger than relief, bigger than fear. Daniel nodded. "That is better than all right." Winter came early that year. First frost in October. Ice in the water troughs by the second week of November. Snow before Thanksgiving, thin at first, then steady enough to make the world smaller and the house more important. As the work changed shape, less field, more keeping. Keeping animals fed, keeping water open, keeping the stove alive, keeping accounts from lying to them, keeping the future from shrinking down to the next cold morning. Daniel had always thought winter was quiet because there was less to do. That winter taught him otherwise. Winter is quiet because the world waits to hear whether a house can hold. This one held. It held because Esther had put beans by, because the ditch had watered what needed watering before frost, because the cattle had gone into cold weather with weight on them, because the debts had been trimmed without cutting the living part out of the place, and because the evenings were no longer hollow. Daniel and Esther sat at opposite ends of the kitchen table most nights. He mended leather or sharpened tools. She worked accounts or wrote letters she sometimes burned and sometimes sent. The lamp sat between them. The currant root sat in the window beyond it, no longer a stub now, but a small green insistence. They did not speak constantly. They did not need to. The room had learned a new kind of silence, not the old silence that pressed against Daniel's ribs, a companionable one, a silence with two people in it. Sometime in December, he stopped calling her Miss Vale. He did not decide to. He came in from breaking ice on the trough, hands numb and coat stiff, and she handed him coffee before he asked. "Thank you, Esther," he said. She looked at him over the rim of her own cup, only for a second. Then she said, "You're welcome, Daniel." His name sounded strange in her voice, not unfamiliar, too familiar, as if it had been waiting there longer than either of them admitted. After that, the old forms fell away quietly, like snow from a roof in the thaw. She told him more in winter, not all of it, not in a rush. Truth, for Esther, came by measured portions. Her father had died in debt. Her uncle had taken her in and treated her fairly until illness made him afraid. Brant had stepped into that fear with help in one hand and expectation in the other. For years, every kindness from him had carried a hook hidden in it. When her uncle died, Brant had believed the debt transferred with the furniture. Esther had written no twice. Then she had done the harder thing. She had left. "Were you afraid to come here?" Daniel asked one night. She considered. "Yes. You came anyway. I was more afraid of staying." The stove cracked softly. Daniel looked at the currant in the window. "Why bring that?" She followed his gaze. My mother planted the bush it came from. He wished immediately that he had asked more gently. Esther did not seem wounded by the question, only careful with the answer. When I left, I could not take furniture. I could not take land. I could not take anything that would look like inheritance. So I cut a root from the old bush before dawn and put it in that cup. Did you think it would live? No. Then why take it? She looked at him. Because leaving with nothing felt too much like agreeing with them. Daniel did not answer. Some truths do not need a response. They need a witness. Spring returned like a verdict delivered slowly. Mud first, then water, then a line of green at the ditch bank, then cattle lifting their heads to softer wind. By April, the claim was not the same claim. The West Bend held. The garden beds were doubled and fenced against rabbits. The pantry roof no longer leaked. The cattle had wintered with losses so small, Daniel checked the count twice. The ledger, for the first time since he had started keeping one, showed numbers that did not frighten him. Not wealth. Something better. A future with footing. One morning, Daniel climbed the low ridge above the lower pasture to check the fence after a night of rain. From there he could see the whole place, the house, the barn, the clean line of the ditch, the garden laid out in sensible rows, smoke lifting from the chimney, cattle spread across grass that had been given time to recover. He stood there a long while, because the sight did something to him. For years he had looked at that land and seen a list of what was failing. Now he saw a pattern. Not perfection, not rescue. Pattern. The shape of work done in the right order by two people who had stopped pretending one person should be enough. That was when Daniel understood. He did not love Esther because she had saved the claim. He loved her because she had never treated the claim as something separate from his life, or her work as something separate from her dignity, or truth as something that needed decorating before it could stand. He walked back down to the house. Esther was at the kitchen table, marking seed rows on a scrap of paper. The currant cutting, now rooted properly, had outgrown the cracked cup. Its leaves touched the window frame. Daniel stood in the doorway long enough for her to look up. "What is it?" she asked. "I was looking at the place." She waited. "It looks like it knows what it is now," he said. Something changed in her face, a softening so small a careless man would have missed it. "It is getting there," she said. "No," Daniel said. "It is there." He came to the table but did not sit. "I want you to stay." She looked down at the seed plan, then back at him. "For the year?" "No." The room held very still. "The terms would need to be plain," she said. "Yes." "And real?" "Yes." "I would not be folded into your life like furniture." "No." "I would have an equal hand in the place." Daniel looked at the ledger, the seed plan, the window, the rooted currant, and finally at her. "You already do." Her fingers rested on the pencil. For once, she did not have an answer ready. "Daniel," she said. "Esther. Are you asking me to marry you?" "Yes." "Because you need me?" He shook his head. "Because I know the difference now." A long quiet passed. Then Esther looked toward the currant root in the window. It had come in a cracked cup, through dust, through winter, through fear, through no guarantee at all, and still it had taken hold. She turned back to him. "Then yes," she said. Not shyly, not dramatically, plainly, the way she had written her first letter, the way she had claimed the porch in front of Russell Brant, the way she had cut the ditch so water could finally move. Daniel sat down then because his legs had become less reliable than usual. Esther smiled. This time, not almost. By summer, the currant bush was planted outside the kitchen window. It was small and would need guarding. The soil there was not perfect. The wind worried at it. Rabbits found it interesting. A late hailstorm bruised half its leaves. But it lived. So did the claim. The garden produced enough to sell in Stanton, which Esther did without apology, and with better bargaining than Daniel had ever managed. The calves brought a fair price in October. Harker's debt was cleared before winter. Celia Marsh told anyone who asked that Daniel Keene had finally developed sense, though she made sure to say it when Esther could hear. They were married at the house in September. No crowd, no flourish, no borrowed lace. Just Celia, the storekeeper, a preacher with cold hands, and a wind strong enough to keep the ceremony honest. Afterward, Celia looked at Esther and said, "Took you both long enough?" Esther answered, "We were making sure the foundation would hold." Daniel did laugh then, a real laugh. It startled the preacher so badly he dropped his hat. That evening, when the house was quiet again, Daniel and Esther sat on the porch looking over the lower pasture. The light was low. The cattle were settled. The ditch moved quietly through the grass. For a long time, neither spoke. Then Esther said, "What did you think when you found my letter?" Daniel considered lying in some elegant way and found he had no talent for it. "I thought any woman who asks for wages, fair speech, and a bolt on the door is telling me exactly what matters." "And what did you think that meant?" He looked at her hand resting on the arm of the chair. "That I had better learn to deserve the letter." She was quiet. Then she put her hand over his, not as a question, not as proof, as placement. Like setting a latch, like closing a gate, like putting a living root into ground and pressing the soil around it with both hands. The currant bush stood beneath the kitchen window, small and stubborn in the evening light. It had not survived because the world was kind. It survived because someone carried it carefully when there was no promise it would live. Because someone gave it room. Because someone kept it watered. Because someone believed a cracked cup could still carry a root. And in the end, that was the whole story of the place. Not rescue, not luck, not a miracle. A root given honest ground, and two people willing to keep it alive.